I was standing in the middle of our gutted corner office holding a signed $500,000 contract when I realized my boss had banished my entire department to a windowless basement. He claimed our new star executive needed the premium space to unleash his Silicon Valley genius. When I went downstairs and saw my top performing team sitting on folding chairs looking devastated, I did not cry or throw a fit. I simply smiled, set down my briefcase, and told them to pack their bags because we were about to orchestrate the most expensive corporate takedown in Chicago history. My boss had no idea that his brilliant new hire was actually a complete fraud who had faked his entire resume, but he was about to find out the hard way. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a toxic boss try to steal your credit and push you aside for a loudmouth who did absolutely nothing. Trust me, you will want to hear how this ended. I am Sloan, 33 years old, and for 6 grueling years, I was the director of digital marketing strategy at one of the top advertising agencies in the city. I did not just manage a team, I built the entire department from scratch. I spent my late 20s working 70-hour weeks, skipping vacations, and constantly missing Sunday family dinners with my sister Megan and her husband Andre, who is a brilliant African-American corporate attorney. My team consisted of 2 incredibly smart data analysts named Kira and Leo. Together, we were the quiet engine keeping the lights on, consistently bringing in more than half of the agency revenue. But in the corporate world, hard work is rarely rewarded with loyalty. It is usually rewarded with more work, while the credit goes to whoever speaks the loudest in the boardroom. That loudmouth arrived on a Tuesday morning. Our Vice President Harrison was a classic corporate opportunist. He cared more about his golf handicap and expensive tailored suits than actual performance metrics. He had recently sent out a company-wide email boasting about a new senior creative director he had personally recruited. Harrison claimed this man, Chase Montgomery, was a Silicon Valley prodigy with an Ivy League degree and an extensive background as a top executive at Google. I was completely unaware of the chaos unfolding at the office because I was across town in a 3-hour pitch meeting. When I finally returned to the agency exhausted but proud to be carrying a massive new client contract, I walked up to the 4th floor, expecting to brief my team on our victory. Instead, I stepped out of the elevator and froze in my tracks. The expansive glass-walled corner suite that my team had occupied for 3 years was entirely gutted. Our dual monitor setups, our whiteboards covered in campaign strategies, my ergonomic chair, everything was gone. In their place stood sleek new minimalist furniture, a massive espresso machine, and a guy in his 30s wearing a cashmere sweater, loudly dictating instructions to the IT department about where to mount his flat-screen television. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "What exactly is happening here?" Chase turned around, looking me up and down with an expression of mild amusement. "You must be Sloan. Harrison mentioned you." "I am Chase. I am just getting my creative hub set up. The energy in here is incredible, do you not think?" I ignored his outstretched hand. "Where is my team? Where is our equipment?" Chase smirked, running the hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Oh, right. Harrison had facilities relocate your department. You guys are down in sub-level B now. Less foot traffic, you know. Better for whatever it is you data crunchers do." Sub-level B, the basement. A windowless, poorly ventilated storage area located next to the building, massive heating and cooling units. My blood ran cold, but I forced my face to remain entirely expressionless. I turned on my heel and walked straight to Harrison Corner office. I did not bother knocking. I opened the door to find Harrison practicing his putting stroke on a velvet mat. He looked up entirely unbothered by my sudden intrusion. "Sloan, excellent timing," Harrison beamed, leaning on his putter. "I assume you have met Chase?" "Absolute rock star. I had to pull a lot of strings to get him away from Google." "You moved my department to the basement," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "My team generates more than half the revenue for this entire agency, Harrison. And you moved us to a storage closet without a single word of notice while I was out securing another account." Harrison rolled his eyes, dropping the putter and walking behind his mahogany desk. Do not be dramatic, Sloan. It is an open concept lower level workspace. Chase is our new star employee. He needs the premium suite to entertain high-end creative clients. You guys just sit behind screens all day looking at spreadsheets. You do not need panoramic views of the Chicago skyline to do math. The blatant disrespect was breathtaking. He was not just displacing us. He was actively diminishing 6 years of foundational work. My math, I countered, is the only reason this agency can afford to pay for Chase Espresso machine. You are disrupting the workflow of your top-performing team for a guy who has not even logged a single hour of billable work yet. Harrison's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, patronizing sneer. Look, Sloan, I know you have worked hard, but the industry is changing. We need fresh, dynamic leadership. Chase brings a Silicon Valley pedigree that we desperately need to secure the upcoming Zenith e-commerce contract. We need a golden boy out front. Play nice, be a team player, and maybe I will approve a budget for some better lighting down in sub-level B. The Zenith e-commerce contract was a $15 million mega deal I had been laying the groundwork for over the past 8 months. I had built the initial predictive models. I had established the contacts. And now Harrison was casually signaling that he was positioning his new favorite hire to take the credit for it. I did not yell. I did not threaten to quit. Years of corporate survival had taught me that emotional reactions only give your enemies ammunition to call you unstable. Understood, I said smoothly. I will go check on my team. I took the freight elevator down to the basement. The air smelled of damp concrete and ozone. Kira and Leo were sitting on folding chairs amidst a sea of cardboard boxes, looking utterly defeated. Leo, who had just won a prestigious industry award the month before, was staring blankly at a flickering fluorescent light tube above his head. Sloan, Kira said, her voice trembling with frustration. They literally tossed our files into trash bags to move them. Half my hard drives are missing cables. I looked at the 2 brilliant people who had trusted me, who had worked weekends to build this department alongside me. The agency had just showed us exactly how little we mattered. They wanted our output, but they wanted to bury us in the dark while a shiny new hire stole the spotlight. I walked over to the center of the concrete room, placing my briefcase on a stack of boxes. I looked at Kira and Leo, allowing a slow, razor-sharp smile to form on my lips. Do not bother unpacking the heavy stuff, I told them. Just grab your laptops, pack your bags. Leo looked confused. Are we quitting? Because I swear I will walk out right now. No, I replied, my mind already calculating the next 10 moves in a highly strategic game of corporate warfare. We are not quitting. If we quit, they keep our data, our models, and the Zenith contract. We are going to let them think they have won. We are going to sit in this basement, and we are going to quietly burn their entire operation to the ground from the inside out. They did not know it yet, but Harrison and Chase had just made the most expensive mistake of their miserable careers. The basement was not a punishment. It was the perfect place to build a bomb in absolute secrecy. The next morning, the reality of our new subterranean existence set in. The basement was freezing cold, echoing with the constant mechanical hum of the building heating and cooling systems. Every time someone on the upper floors flushed a toilet, we could hear the pipes rattling violently within the thick concrete walls. It was an environment perfectly designed to crush morale, but I refused to let my team break under the pressure. I walked in carrying 3 large coffees and set them on the flimsy folding tables we were forced to use as desks. We treat this like a war room, I told Kira and Leo. Do your daily tasks hit your minimum performance metrics, but do not offer a single piece of voluntary insight to the upper floors. We operate strictly on a need-to-know basis from this moment forward. Up on the 4th floor, Chase was already making his presence known. He was exceptionally loud, intensely charismatic, and entirely devoid of actual substance. Within his first 48 hours of employment, he scheduled 3 separate synergy alignment meetings that lasted 2 hours each, completely disrupting our daily workflow. During these meetings, he paced around the boardroom like a motivational speaker, throwing out meaningless tech buzzwords like disruptive paradigm shifts and holistic growth hacking. He actively avoided any concrete discussion about project deliverables or client data. He just wanted an audience to validate his ego. It did not take long for the first real conflict to arise. On Thursday afternoon, my desk phone rang. It was Harrison. "Sloan, I need you upstairs immediately," Harrison barked through the receiver. "Bring your laptop. Chase wants to do a deep dive into the Zenith e-commerce architecture." I took a deep breath, grabbed my laptop, and took the slow freight elevator up from our dungeon. When I walked into my old corner office, Chase was sitting in my old executive chair, his feet propped up carelessly on the expensive glass desk. Harrison was leaning against the wall, looking thoroughly impressed by whatever Chase had just been saying. Sloan Chase clapped his hands together loudly. "Welcome to the Creative Hub. Listen, I have been reviewing the preliminary briefs for the Zenith pitch. It is cute, lots of numbers, very academic. But it lacks a soul, you know. It needs that major tech company innovation to really pop." I maintained a perfectly neutral expression despite the insult. The current predictive model guarantees a 24% increase in user retention over the first quarter based strictly on their historical data. Zenith is a highly analytical, data-driven company. They want a massive return on investment, not soul. Chase sighed dramatically, looking at Harrison as if dealing with a stubborn, difficult child. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Harrison. Narrow, restrictive thinking. Look, Sloan, I need you to transfer all the raw data files, the source codes for your predictive models, and the entire historical client database to my shared drive by 5 this evening. I'm going to tear it all down and rebuild it with a disruptive creative vision." I stared at him in utter disbelief. He was asking for the absolute keys to the kingdom. He was demanding the proprietary models that Kira, Leo, and I had spent 6 agonizing years building and refining. "Those models are the intellectual property of my specific department," I stated firmly. "They require complex algorithmic keys to run properly. If you do not know the back-end coding language, handing you the raw data is entirely useless. What exactly is your plan for the technical side of the pitch?" Harrison stepped forward, his face reddening with immediate anger. "Sloan, do not question his process. Chase is the senior creative director now. He oversees the entire strategy from top to bottom. You will hand over the data, the blueprints, and the models exactly as he asked. Your job is to support his vision, not gatekeep vital company assets." I looked at Harrison, the man who had happily taken credit for my exhausting work for years. "Are you officially ordering me to surrender unrestricted administrative access of our proprietary data models to someone who is not trained to use them?" I asked, making sure to speak clearly and deliberately. I wanted every single word of this interaction burned into my memory. "I am ordering you to do your job," Harrison snapped. "Stop acting like a jealous subordinate. You are lucky you still have a department at all. Have the files on his drive by 5, or I will have human resources review your blatant insubordination." He stepped closer, dropping his voice into a patronizing whisper. "You have been a big fish in a small pond for too long, Sloan. Chase is a star. He is playing in an entirely different league. Do not make me choose between my star employee and a bitter manager who refuses to adapt to change." The threat was abundantly clear. Comply or be fired on the spot. He was actively gaslighting me into believing my protective instinct over our hard work was just petty, unfounded jealousy. I looked at Chase, who was smirking triumphantly from behind the desk. "Understood," I said smoothly. "I will initiate the transfer immediately." I walked back down to the basement, my mind racing with possibilities. They wanted the data. They wanted to steal our work and slap Chase's name on it for the biggest client pitch of the year. But I knew something Harrison did not. Data is only as powerful as the person interpreting it. When I got back to the basement, Kira looked up from her screen. What did they want? "They want everything I said," opening my laptop. "Chase wants the raw data and the predictive models for the Zenith pitch. Harrison just threatened to fire me if I do not hand it all over by 5. Leo slammed his fist heavily onto the folding table. "Are you kidding me? We spent 6 months writing those specific algorithms. He is going to steal our hard work, pitch it as his own brilliant idea, and completely cut us out of the lucrative commission structure." "Exactly," I said, pulling up the master database on my screen. "Which is why we are going to give him exactly what he asked for. but we are going to sanitize it first. Kira, I want you to strip all the macro formulas out of the spreadsheet files. Leave the hard numbers but remove the automated calculation functions entirely. Leo, take the predictive model code and extract the essential execution sequences. Give him the structural framework but permanently remove the engine. A slow, wicked smile spread across Leo's face as he fully understood the play. We give him the luxury car, but we keep the steering wheel and the brakes. Precisely, I nodded. Chase loudly claims he is a Silicon Valley genius. If he really worked at a top tech firm at an executive level, he will spot the missing sequences in 10 minutes and rewrite them himself. But if he is the fraud I highly suspect he is, he will not notice a single thing. He will confidently take an empty shell into that boardroom. By 4:45, I uploaded the massive, severely crippled data files to Chase shared drive. Visually, the files looked incredibly impressive, hundreds of pages of charts, graphs, and complex coding structures. But functionally, they were dead on arrival. Without our specific daily inputs and execution commands, the models could not process any new information. They were entirely static. We packed our bags for the day in total silence. The basement felt a little less cold now. We had just handed our arrogant boss and his golden boy a loaded weapon completely stripped of its safety mechanism, and they were too ignorant to realize it was going to blow up directly in their hands. The high of our secret sabotage faded quickly the following Monday morning. Handing over the sanitized files was a tactical victory, but sitting in that windowless concrete box while Chase paraded our work around the fourth floor was a brutal psychological test. The immediate fallout of our banishment was far worse than the physical cold of sub-level B. It was the complete and sudden erasure of our professional identities. For 3 years, my team had been the golden goose of the agency. Executives used to stop by our glass-walled suite just to high-five Leo for a successful ad spend, or ask Kira for her insights on market trends. Now it was as if we had ceased to exist. The isolation was deafening. The only communication we received from the upper floors came in the form of incredibly condescending emails from Chase. He stopped addressing us by our names. His emails started with greetings like team or data support. He requested menial tasks that an intern could have completed, demanding we reformat his presentation slides or adjust the font sizes on the very data models we had spent years engineering. By Wednesday, the morale in the basement had completely crashed. The adrenaline of our initial rebellion had worn off, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating resentment. I watched it happen in real time. Kira, usually the most optimistic and vibrant person in the room, spent her entire lunch break crying silently in the dingy downstairs restroom. She had missed her best friend bachelorette party just 2 months prior to finalize the demographic targeting for the Zenith account. She had given up her personal life for that data, and now she was watching a corporate imposter claim it as his midnight epiphany. Leo was faring even worse. His anger had morphed into a dark, cynical depression. He stopped bringing his award-winning ideas to our morning huddles. Instead, he spent hours aggressively clicking through job boards, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He had a master's degree in data analytics, and Chase was currently making him highlight spreadsheet cells in neon green because it matched the new creative vision. It was a masterclass in corporate humiliation. I sat at my flimsy folding table listening to the harsh rattle of the HVAC unit above us and felt a profound, burning rage taking root in my chest. I looked at my team, broken and discarded, and then I thought about what it had taken to build this department. I was 27 years old when Harrison first hired me. The digital marketing division did not even exist back then. It was just me, a single desk in a cramped hallway, and a mandate to bring the agency into the modern era. I gave them everything. I poured every ounce of my energy, my youth, and my intellect into building a revenue-generating machine. I worked through holidays. I answered client emails at 3 in the morning. I flew across the country on red-eye flights to secure accounts while the rest of the executive team played golf. The sacrifices were not just professional, they were deeply, painfully personal. I missed my sister Megan's 30th birthday party because Harrison needed a last-minute pitch deck revised. I missed my own anniversary dinners. My brother-in-law Andre had warned me constantly. He would sit across from me at their dining table during the rare Sunday dinners. I actually managed to attend his sharp legal mind seeing right through the corporate exploitation. He would tell me that loyalty to a corporation is a one-way street, that the moment I became inconvenient, they would pave right over me. I used to argue with him, insisting that my hard work was building equity, that Harrison valued my dedication. Sitting in that freezing basement, I realized how agonizingly right Andre had been. 6 years of absolute devotion had bought me a folding chair next to a boiler room. 6 years of generating millions in profit had earned me a demotion masked as a restructuring simply because Harrison wanted a shiny new toy with a fake Silicon Valley pedigree to parade in front of the Zenith executives. The sheer audacity of the betrayal was staggering. Harrison knew exactly what he was doing. He was slowly, methodically breaking our spirits, hoping we would either submit entirely to Chase or quit out of frustration, leaving our proprietary work behind for them to exploit. He wanted us desperate. He wanted us to feel replaceable. I stood up, pushing my chair back against the concrete wall. The harsh scraping sound echoed through the small room, causing both Kira and Leo to look up from their monitors. "Listen to me," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the despair that was drowning them. "I know how much this hurts. I know you feel like everything we built has been stolen, but you have to understand that this humiliation is part of their strategy. Harrison wants you to quit Leo. He wants you to walk out that door so he can hand your code to Chase permanently without paying you a dime of the commission you earned." Leo shook his head, his eyes red with frustration. "Sloan, I cannot take another email from that guy. He just asked me to change the predictive timeline into a pie chart because circles are more friendly. He is an absolute idiot, and he is going to ruin the Zenith pitch." "That is exactly what we want him to do," I reminded him sharply. "We want him to walk into that boardroom feeling like a king. We want him to stand in front of the CEO and the Zenith executives with absolute confidence. The bigger his ego gets right now, the harder he is going to fall when the system crashes." Kira wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "But what if it does not work? What if Harrison covers for him again? What if they still win the contract using our sanitized data?" "They will not," I promised her, the absolute certainty in my voice anchoring the room. "Because I am not just leaving this to a software glitch. We are not just going to embarrass them. We are going to legally and financially dismantle them. I am leaving early today. I have a dinner planned with Megan and Andre. It is time to bring in the heavy artillery." I looked around the miserable basement, committing every water stain and flickering light to memory. I wanted to remember exactly what it felt like to be pushed into the dirt, so I would not feel a single ounce of mercy when it was time to bury them. "Hold the line for one more day," I told my team, packing my laptop into my bag. "Let Chase play the star employee. Tomorrow we start building our own agency." I walked out of the basement and headed toward the elevator, my mind shifting from defense to pure calculated offense. The days of sacrificing my life for Harrison Agency were officially over. It was time to go to war. The next morning, I arrived at the building with a level of clarity I had not felt in years. The drive to work was usually filled with anxiety about deadlines and client retention, but today my mind was entirely focused on execution. When I walked into the lobby, I did not head straight for the basement. I took the elevator to the executive floor, poured myself a premium coffee from the kitchen they had banned my team from using, and walked directly past Harrison's office. I wanted them to see that I was not hiding. I wanted them to feel comfortable in their perceived dominance. By the time I took the freight elevator down to sub-level B, Kira and Leo were already at their folding tables, but the atmosphere had shifted. The crushing despair from the day before was gone, replaced by a tense electric anticipation. They were ready for whatever came next. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy metal door to the basement groaned open. I looked up, expecting to see a janitor or a facilities manager. Instead, Chase walked in wearing a ridiculously expensive tailored suit that looked entirely out of place in our concrete dungeon. He stepped carefully over a stray extension cord, looking around the room with an expression of exaggerated disgust. He walked around our small space, picking up a framed industry award Kira had left on a box and tossing it back down carelessly. He was enjoying this. He wanted us to feel small. He wanted to assert total dominance before the zenith pitch, so there would be absolutely no question about who was in charge when the millions of dollars started flowing in. "Cozy setup you have down here," Chase sneered, stopping in front of my desk. "Very industrial. It really fits the back-end data vibe." I did not offer him a seat. "What do you want, Chase? We have client deliverables to manage." Chase sighed, leaning against a stack of cardboard boxes. "That is exactly why I am here." Harrison and I had a long strategy session over dinner last night. The Zenith pitch is massive, but it is just the beginning. We want to scale the creative vision across the entire agency portfolio. To do that, I cannot just rely on the static models you gave me on Tuesday. I need the foundational blueprints. I stared at him, my expression hardening. The foundational blueprints were not just a single file. They were the master architecture of the agency digital infrastructure. The blueprints contain 6 years of proprietary algorithms, raw client data from over 50 active accounts, and the exact coding frameworks Leo had built to automate our media buying. It was the absolute heart of the agency. Those blueprints are an interconnected web of live databases, I explained, keeping my voice dangerously level. They require constant maintenance and a deep understanding of structural coding to navigate. If you touch the raw architecture without knowing what you are doing, you could crash active client campaigns. Chase waved his hand dismissively, flashing that insufferable, arrogant smile. "Sloan, you really need to stop gatekeeping the tech. I manage global databases at Google. I think I can handle a mid-sized advertising agency server framework. I need unrestricted administrative access to the master servers, the raw client data, and the foundational blueprints. I want it all transferred to my primary control by noon today." I looked at Leo, who had gone completely rigid in his chair. Handing over administrative control meant Chase could lock us out of our own system. He could change the passwords, claim total ownership of our historical work, and effectively render us useless. It was the final step in their plan to completely absorb my department and steal the ultimate credit. I turned back to Chase. "Administrative control requires Harrison direct authorization. I cannot legally transfer ownership of the master servers without a signed executive order." Chase reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp white sheet of paper. He dropped it onto my folding table. It was an official company directive signed in blue ink by Harrison. The document mandated the immediate transfer of all digital department assets, passwords, and server controls to the senior creative director. It was a stark reminder of how quickly corporate loyalty evaporates. 6 years of generating millions, and Harrison had signed my execution order without even having the courage to look me in the eye and do it himself. "Harrison said you might be difficult about this," Chase said, his voice dripping with condescension. He wanted to make sure everything was properly documented. "Consider this your official reassignment of duties. You and your team are now strictly support staff. I own the architecture. Have the transfer completed by noon or security will be escorting you out of the building." He did not wait for a response. He turned around and walked out of the basement, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him. The room fell dead silent. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed above us. Leo stood up, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "He is taking everything. He is literally stealing 6 years of my life with a single piece of paper. If we give him the master passwords, he can lock us out forever. He can delete our access logs and claim he built the entire infrastructure himself." Kira looked terrified. "Sloan, what do we do? If we do not hand it over, we are fired today. We lose our salaries, our health insurance, everything." I picked up the executive order, staring at Harrison's signature. They thought this was a checkmate. They thought stripping me of my administrative power would leave me completely defenseless. But they fundamentally misunderstood how digital architecture actually works. "We give him the keys," I said quietly, dropping the paper back onto the table. Leo looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Are you insane? You just said yesterday we were going to war. Giving him the master passwords is total surrender." "No, Leo." I smiled, a cold, calculating thrill running through my veins. Giving him the master passwords is handing him a loaded gun and pointing it directly at his own chest. I walked over to Leo's computer and pointed at the screen. Chase wants the foundational blueprints, he wants the raw client data. He thinks owning the server means he owns the magic, but he does not know how the server was built. You built it, Leo. You know every single backdoor, every hidden directory, and every automated trigger in that system. Leo slowly sat back down, his eyes narrowing as he began to see the angle. I built a mirror server last year for emergency backups. It is completely off the books. Harrison does not even know it exists because I never submitted the hardware requisition forms. I bought the drives myself. Exactly, I nodded. We are going to execute the transfer exactly as Harrison ordered. We will give Chase full administrative control of the primary servers. We will hand over the raw client data and the foundational blueprints. But before we do, I want you to duplicate the entire infrastructure onto your mirror server. We keep a perfect functional copy of our life work entirely disconnected from the agency network. Kira pulled her chair closer. And what happens to the primary server we give to Chase? I leaned in, resting my hands on the table. We leave it exactly as it is, but we set a trap inside the foundation. Chase is going to take those blueprints and try to plug them into the Zenith pitch to prove he has total command of the agency data. He is going to try and run a live simulation using the raw client numbers. Leo's fingers began flying across his keyboard, pulling up the master command terminal. If I alter the root directory paths just slightly, it will not affect the daily operations. The active client campaigns will keep running smoothly. But if someone tries to extract a massive historical data pull for a live presentation without using our specific decryption sequence, the system will instantly initiate a security lockdown protocol. It will look like a catastrophic data breach. Kira realized, her eyes widening with excitement. The server will freeze and it will flag the user as an unauthorized internal threat. And since Chase demanded total administrative control, I added, the system will log him as the sole responsible party for the breach. He is demanding the keys to the castle without knowing how to disarm the alarm system. By 11:30 that morning, we had completely cloned our 6 years of work onto Leo's hidden mirror server. We packed the drives safely into my briefcase. Then, with a few keystrokes, Leo initiated the ownership transfer of the primary agency network. He changed the administrative names, updated the security credentials, and handed total undisputed control of the digital marketing department over to Chase. At exactly noon, I sent an email to Chase and Harrison. The subject line was simply "Transfer Complete." I attached a single document containing the new master passwords. We sat back in our folding chairs and looked at the glowing screens in front of us. We were officially locked out of the empire we had built. On paper, we had nothing. But in reality, we held the detonator. Chase had just hijacked a vehicle rigged with high explosives, and he was absolutely thrilled to be in the driver's seat. The rest of the week in the basement was agonizingly slow. We were entirely locked out of the primary agency network. We spent our days staring at the offline mirror server, running diagnostic tests on our cloned data, just to look busy when the facility's staff walked by. Upstairs, the agency was buzzing with chaotic energy. The internal presentation for the Zenith account was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. This was the mandatory all-hands briefing where Chase would unveil his grand creative vision to Harrison and the internal executive board before they pitched it to the actual client on Friday. It was his moment to prove that stealing our department was worth the massive disruption. On Thursday at 1 o'clock, my desk phone rang. It was the administrative assistant from the executive floor. She told me that Harrison required my team to attend the internal briefing in the main conference room. We were instructed to sit in the back row and provide technical support if the projector malfunctioned. They did not want our strategic input. They wanted us there as visual props. They wanted to force us to watch our own execution. I told Kira and Leo to grab their notebooks and keep their faces completely blank. We walked out of the basement and took the elevator up to the 4th floor, entering a room that was practically vibrating with corporate excitement. The main conference room was packed. Every department head, vice president, and senior manager was seated around the massive oak table. Harrison sat at the head of the table looking incredibly smug. Chase was standing at the front of the room wearing another expensive tailored suit, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as he prepared to speak. The massive projector screen behind him displayed a vibrant orange title slide that read, "The Zenith Paradigm." It was the exact demographic targeting presentation Kira had spent 3 months building, just recolored to look more aggressive. We took our seats in the very back row, entirely ignored by the room. The lights dimmed, and Chase clicked his presentation remote to begin the show. What followed was 45 minutes of the most excruciating, blatantly stolen performance I had ever witnessed in my professional career. Slide after slide, Chase presented the exact methodologies I had spent 8 months developing. He presented Kira demographic retention strategies as his own midnight epiphanies. He showcased Leo proprietary algorithmic scaling models as a Silicon Valley-inspired growth hack he had conceptualized over the weekend. He spoke with incredible confidence, waving his hands and pacing the room like a visionary tech founder. He did not change a single fundamental data point. He simply stripped our names off the slides and replaced our clinical analytics with ridiculous corporate buzzwords. The truly agonizing part was his profound ignorance of the material he was stealing. When attempting to explain the machine learning aspect of our predictive model, he continuously confused basic programming terms. He referred to algorithmic latency as digital lag vibes. He completely botched the explanation of the customer acquisition funnel, attributing a massive calculated spike in third-quarter revenue to creative synergy instead of the highly targeted search engine optimization campaign we had run. He was butchering the science of our work. I watched Leo out of the corner of my eye. His hands were gripping his notebook so tightly I thought the spine would snap. We were watching a toddler play with a complex machine he did not understand. But Harrison ate it up. A true executive with actual industry knowledge would have spotted the massive gaping holes in Chase's technical vocabulary immediately. But Harrison was not looking for a technical expert. He was looking for a confident frontman to sell an illusion, as long as Chase sounded impressive and the slides looked pretty. Harrison did not care that the foundation was entirely hollow. It confirmed everything Andre had suspected about their financial history. This was a calculated heist, not a legitimate marketing pitch. Harrison wanted a puppet who could blind the client with charm while they funneled the budget elsewhere. When the presentation concluded, Harrison was the first person to start clapping. "Outstanding work," Chase Harrison declared loudly to the room. "This is exactly the kind of visionary leadership this agency has been starving for. Groundbreaking." The rest of the department heads quickly joined in the applause, eager to please the vice president. Harrison then shot a deliberate pointed look at me in the back row. The message was obvious. He wanted me to see what a real executive looked like. He wanted me to acknowledge my defeat in front of the entire company. I did not flinch. I kept my face entirely blank, letting the applause wash over me. Chase beamed, soaking in the unearned praise like a sponge. Chase turned his condescending gaze toward the back of the room, looking directly at me. "Sloan, did the technical jargon hold up for you? I need you to confirm the back-end numbers on slide 42 are not going to embarrass me tomorrow during the live simulation." The entire room turned to look at the three of us sitting in the shadows. It was a blatant power play. He was forcing the ousted director to publicly validate his stolen work. I slowly stood up, closing my notebook with a quiet snap. I looked him dead in the eye, fully aware that the live simulation he was planning to run tomorrow was rigged to self-destruct. "The numbers are perfectly aligned with the models you requested, Chase," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "In fact, we verified the data integration this morning. You will have absolutely no problem running the live demonstration tomorrow." Chase smirked, satisfied with my apparent submission. "Perfect," he said, turning back to Harrison. "See, Harrison, I told you they just needed some strong creative direction to get them motivated." He turned his attention back to the executives, oblivious to his impending downfall. I sat back down, a cold smile touching my lips. The presentation was over and the trap was perfectly set. We just had to wait for him to pull the trigger. The meeting adjourned, and the executives filed out loudly congratulating Chase. I signaled Kira and Leo to head straight back to the basement. Before I could follow them, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. Harrison stood there flushed with his perceived victory. He told me to come to his office immediately. I followed him into his massive corner office. He walked behind his mahogany desk and sat heavily in his leather chair, deliberately not inviting me to sit. He wanted me standing positioned beneath him as he prepared his psychological blow. "Close the door," Sloane Harrison commanded, tapping a silver pen against his desk. I shut the heavy glass door. "I want to talk about your attitude today," Harrison began, crossing his arms. "You were projecting a very hostile energy during that presentation. You looked bitter, like a disgruntled mid-level manager who cannot handle being outpaced by superior talent." I kept my expression neutral. "I answered your questions when prompted," Harrison. "I confirmed the data was integrated. I did exactly what you asked." Harrison scoffed. "Barely. You gave a robotic confirmation. You do not see the bigger picture because you lack the intellectual capacity for it. Chase is operating on a completely different level. He comes from a world of elite disruptive innovation." He stood up and began pacing behind his desk. "Do you know why I hired him over promoting you? It is pedigree, Sloane. Chase went to an Ivy League university. He was groomed for executive leadership from day one. He sat in the executive suites at Google and completely redefined their digital ecosystem. He understands how to leverage human psychology in a way that your little spreadsheets never could." I stood there in silence, listening to my boss weaponize a completely fabricated resume to destroy my confidence. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. He was trying to convince me that my 6 years of proven success were entirely worthless compared to a fictional Ivy League degree. "You went to a state school?" Sloane Harrison continued, his voice dropping into a tone of patronizing pity. "You are a hard worker. You know how to grind out the math. But you are a mechanic. Chase is an architect. You build the engine, but he designs the entire vehicle. You need to stop acting like you are his equal because you are not. You are lucky he is even willing to use your raw data." The sheer audacity of his manipulation was breathtaking. He wanted me to believe that my intelligence was inherently inferior to a man who had literally just mispronounced basic programming terminology in front of the entire company. He wanted me to feel grateful for the opportunity to be exploited by a fraud. I felt a dangerous spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I knew exactly who Chase was. I knew about the community college in Nevada. I knew about the fake Google employment. I knew about the $2 million he embezzled from Harrison failed startup. I possessed the exact documents that would destroy both of their lives, and Harrison was standing right in front of me, using those exact lies to make me feel small. If I were the emotional employee he wanted me to be, I would have screamed. I would have thrown the truth in his face. But I was a strategist. I knew that reacting to his gaslighting would only give him power. "I understand your perspective, Harrison," I said evenly, not breaking eye contact. "You feel that Chase pedigree makes him the ideal candidate to lead the Zenith account." Harrison paused, surprised by my lack of resistance. He expected me to fight back. He wanted an argument so he could document my insubordination. "Yes," he said slowly. "That is exactly what I am saying." "Then my department will continue to provide the mechanical support he needs to execute his vision." I replied, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any emotion. "We will ensure the data simulation runs perfectly tomorrow." Harrison studied my face for a long moment, searching for any sign of sarcasm. When he found none, a cruel smile spread across his face. He thought he had finally broken me. He thought the basement exile and the stolen presentation had successfully crushed my spirit. "Good," Harrison said, sitting back down in his leather chair. "I am glad we finally have an understanding. If you or your team try to undermine Chase again, there will be immediate consequences. Chase has a lot of highly qualified colleagues from his time at Google looking for work. If your team cannot handle the pressure of the new regime, I will gladly approve a budget for Chase to bring in his own people. Do you understand me?" He was threatening Kira and Leo. He was telling me that if we did not submit completely, he would fire my loyal team and replace them with more of Chase's imaginary friends. It was the final, unforgivable line he could cross. "I understand perfectly. I said, turning toward the glass door. I walked out of his office and headed straight for the freight elevator. My heart was pounding with a cold rhythm. Harrison thought he was playing a game of psychological dominance. He thought he had gaslit me into submission using a fake Ivy League ghost. He had no idea that every cruel word he just spoke had only solidified my resolve. I was not just going to let the system crash tomorrow. I was going to make sure the explosion leveled the entire executive floor. I stepped into the basement where Kira and Leo were waiting anxiously. I looked at my team, the brilliant mechanics who were about to dismantle the architect's entire life. "We are clear for tomorrow," I told them, sitting down at my folding table. "Let them have their victory tonight, because tomorrow morning the Ivy League prodigy goes down in flames." It was late Thursday afternoon when the final blow was struck. We were sitting in the basement, quietly running final diagnostic checks on the mirror server, when a loud notification ping echoed from both Kira and Leo computers at the exact same time. I looked up from my screen. Corporate emails usually arrived in batches, but an identical, simultaneous ping to specific subordinates usually meant only one thing: human resources. Kira clicked open her inbox, and I watched the blood completely drain from her face. Leo opened his and let out a sharp, bitter laugh. I stood up and walked over to their folding tables to read over their shoulders. The subject line was identical on both screens: Official Notice of Performance Improvement Plan. In the corporate world, a performance improvement plan, commonly known as a PIP, is a death sentence. It is never actually about improving your performance. It is a calculated legal maneuver designed by human resources to create a documented paper trail of failure. It protects the company from wrongful termination lawsuits by establishing a false narrative that the employee was given a chance to improve, but simply could not meet the new standards. I leaned closer to read the specific requirements Harrison had outlined for my top-tier analysts. They were entirely unachievable. Kira was mandated to increase her demographic data processing speed by 400% within 30 days. Leo was required to manually rewrite an entire library of automated algorithms using a coding language the agency did not even possess the software licenses for. Furthermore, both plans explicitly stated that they were to report directly to Chase for daily evaluations, bypassing me entirely. If they failed to meet these arbitrary daily benchmarks, their employment would be terminated immediately with cause. This meant they would receive absolutely no severance package and no glowing recommendations. "Harrison is not even waiting for the Zenith pitch to clear house," Leo said, his voice shaking with a mixture of profound anger and sudden vulnerability. "He is locking us in a burning building. He wants us to fail so he can fire us for cause." Kira pulled her knees up to her chest, looking incredibly small in her folding chair. "I have a mortgage, Sloan. If they fire me for cause, I lose my health insurance by the end of the month. How did it come to this? We generated millions of dollars for this company, and they are treating us like we are actively stealing from them. They are treating you this way because they are the ones stealing." I reminded them, my voice firm and unwavering. "Remember what Harrison told me in his office. He threatened to bring in Chase highly qualified colleagues from Google. This PIP is not about your actual performance. It is a cleansing plan. Chase does not have any colleagues from Google because he never worked there. But he likely has plenty of shady friends from his failed California startup who need high-paying jobs. Harrison is systematically pushing you out so he can fill this department with loyal accomplices who will help him funnel the Zenith budget into his private shell companies." The reality of the situation hung heavily in the freezing basement air. For the past week, we had been driven by a sense of righteous revenge. We were fighting back against a stolen presentation and a humiliating demotion. But the stakes had just shifted drastically. This was no longer just about protecting our pride or our intellectual property. This was about our fundamental survival. Harrison was actively trying to ruin their financial stability to cover his tracks. I walked back to my desk and opened the heavy leather briefcase sitting next to my laptop. I reached inside and pulled out the thick manila envelopes that Andre had given me. I had been waiting for the absolute perfect moment to present them. Now, with the threat of financial ruin hanging over my team, there was no better time. I walked back over and dropped one envelope in front of Kira and the other in front of Leo. "What are these?" Leo asked, staring at the thick stack of legal documents inside. "Those are your lifelines," I replied smoothly. "But more importantly, those are your new employment contracts. My independent digital marketing company is now officially registered with the state. The non-compete bypass clauses are ironclad. Because Harrison just issued you both a plan stating your current work is unsatisfactory, he effectively voided any claim the agency has that your specific skills are vital to their operations. By putting his insult in writing, he legally handed you the right to walk away cleanly." Kira eagerly pulled the documents from the envelope, her eyes scanning the first page. The salary listed was 20% higher than her current compensation. Leo flipped to the equity section, seeing the guaranteed partnership stakes clearly outlined in bold text. "You do not have to endure 30 days of psychological torture under Chase," I told them, watching the hope slowly return to their faces. "You do not have to report to a man who steals your work. You do not have to worry about your health insurance or your mortgages. You sign those papers right now, and you become the founding partners of a firm built entirely on our actual talent, not corporate fraud." Leo looked up at me, the cynical depression completely vanishing from his eyes. He grabbed a pen, flipped to the signature page, and signed his name with aggressive strokes. "I am in," he said. "Let them have this miserable basement." Kira did not hesitate either. She wiped her eyes, grabbed her own pen, and signed her contract. I took the contracts, placing them securely back into my briefcase. The cleansing plan had completely backfired. Instead of making my team desperate, Harrison provided the final push they needed to sever their loyalty forever. Tomorrow morning, we watch all their dominoes fall. Let the games begin. I packed my briefcase, ensuring the newly signed employment contracts for Kira and Leo were safely secured. I walked out of the agency building as the sun set over the Chicago skyline. The cold basement air was replaced by the warm evening breeze. I walked to my car, my legs feeling heavy. The adrenaline that kept me focused for 4 days evaporated, leaving profound exhaustion. I had saved my team and secured my new company, but the psychological toll was massive. I drove to the suburbs, navigating traffic until I reached the quiet neighborhood where my sister Megan and her husband Andre lived. Their brick house was my sanctuary from the corporate grind. I parked, grabbed my briefcase, and walked to the porch. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the door open immediately, hit by the smell of roasted garlic. Megan walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands. She took one look at me and grabbed a wine glass. "You look like you fought a war and barely survived," she observed with sisterly bluntness. "Sit down before you fall over." I dropped my briefcase and collapsed onto a stool at the kitchen island. Andre walked in holding plates. He was imposing and observant. As a corporate litigation attorney, he spent his days dismantling fraudulent executives. He took one look at my posture and set the plates down. "You got the contract signed," Andre stated with absolute certainty. I nodded, taking the wine Megan handed me. "Kira and Leo signed them an hour ago." Harrison tried to put them on a fake improvement plan to push them out. It backfired perfectly. "They are founding partners of my new firm," Megan cheered, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "I knew you would pull it off, Sloan. You are going to run your own empire." I wanted to feel victorious, but the dam finally broke. The emotional armor I wore all week shattered. I took a sip of wine, my hands shaking. "It is not just about leaving," I admitted, my voice cracking. "It is about what they did. They did not just steal my data. They tried to erase my professional identity." I looked at Andre, exhaustion pulling the truth out of me. Harrison pulled me into his office after Chase butchered the presentation. Chase did not know a single technical term. He called algorithmic latency digital lag vibes. He embarrassed himself in front of the board. Instead of holding him accountable, Harrison told me I was intellectually inferior. He weaponized Chase's supposed Ivy League pedigree and Google background to tell me my 6 years of hard work meant nothing. He gaslit me so aggressively I felt small. Andre stopped moving. He leaned against the counter, his legal mind processing the information. The supportive brother-in-law was replaced by the ruthless attorney. "Hold on," Andre said, his tone shifting into an analytical register. "Let us look at this objectively." A vice president watched a new hire fundamentally fail to understand the core product, and his response was to protect the hire and threaten the people who run the software. Yes, I nodded. He threatened to replace my team with Chase friends from Google if we did not submit. Andre steepled his fingers, staring at the countertop. "Sloan, I deal with corrupt executives every day. They are greedy and selfish, but rarely suicidal with their money. Tomorrow is a $15 million pitch for Zenith. That account dictates Harrison bonus and standing with the CEO. A greedy vice president does not risk a massive contract on a frontman who cannot answer basic questions." "I do not understand," Megan said. "If Chase is terrible, why is Harrison protecting him?" "Because Chase is not just a bad hire," Andre concluded. "He is an accomplice. Harrison brought this guy in for a reason that has nothing to do with marketing. Firing your data team on the eve of a technical pitch is operational sabotage. The only reason an executive sabotages operations is to create a smokescreen for a larger financial play." My heart pounded as the implications sank in. "What kind of financial play?" "I do not know yet," Andre replied, his eyes dark. "But I will find out tonight. You said Harrison claims this guy is an Ivy League graduate and former Google executive. The tech world at that level is small and highly documented. A prodigy jumping from a massive conglomerate to a mid-sized agency makes zero logical sense. The compensation packages and career trajectory are entirely backward." "Did Human Resources run a background check?" Megan asked. "I assume so," I replied. "But Harrison bypassed the usual hiring protocols. He brought Chase in directly as a senior hire. Human Resources pushes the paperwork through when a partner mandates it." Andre walked over to his briefcase and pulled out his silver laptop. He carried it to the kitchen island and opened it. "Give me his full legal name," Andre demanded. "Chase Montgomery," I said, feeling a surge of nervous energy. "But Andre, you cannot hack into the agency servers. If they trace an unauthorized query back to me, Harrison will sue my new firm for corporate espionage before we even open." Andre let out a booming laugh. "Sloan, please. I am a corporate attorney. I do not hack. I conduct comprehensive, fully legal, open-source intelligence gathering. Everything a person does leaves a digital footprint in public records and corporate registries. You just have to know exactly where to look. Give me an hour with his digital shadow." Megan smiled, patting my shoulder. "Let him work, Sloan. When Andre gets that specific look, somebody is about to have a very bad day. Let us eat dinner. You need your strength for tomorrow." We moved to the table, but the atmosphere had completely shifted from exhaustion to intense anticipation. I slowly ate my dinner in silence, watching Andre type furiously on his keyboard, fully knowing that the ultimate war was just beginning. The only sound in the dining room was the rapid clacking of Andre typing on his silver laptop. Megan cleared the plates and brought out a pot of decaf coffee, pouring us each a cup. I stared at the dark liquid, my mind racing through every interaction I had ever had with Chase. His arrogance, his perfectly tailored suits, his complete lack of fundamental marketing knowledge. It all felt like a performance, and Andre was currently pulling back the curtain. After 45 minutes of intense silence, Andre stopped typing. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He let out a long, slow exhale that sounded like a mix of sheer disbelief and professional disgust. He turned the laptop screen toward me. "Sloan, your boss did not just hire a fraud," Andre said, his voice dropping into a deadly serious tone. "He hired an absolute ghost." I leaned forward, looking at the glowing screen. There were dozens of tabs open, displaying public registry databases, archived tech blogs, and corporate filing sites. "What did you find?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Let us start with the most obvious lie," Andre said, tapping a pen against the table. "Harrison claims this man was a senior executive at Google. He claims Chase was responsible for redefining their digital ecosystem. Sloan, the tech industry at the executive level is a goldfish bowl. You do not reach a senior position at a major conglomerate without leaving a massive, undeniable digital footprint." Andre opened a new tab displaying a complex search algorithm. I ran his name through every archived tech conference panel, every published white paper, and every corporate press release from the last 10 years. High-level executives give keynote speeches. They are quoted in financial magazines. They sit on charity boards. Chase Montgomery has absolutely zero presence in the tech sector. He has never been quoted. He has never authored a paper. He does not exist in any Google employee alumni network. I stared at the screen, the reality of the deception washing over me. How is that even possible? Even if Harrison bypassed the formal background check, someone in human resources would have noticed he had no internet presence. Because he paid for a digital scrub, Andre explained, pulling up a different website. A digital scrub is a service used by disgraced politicians and corporate criminals to erase their historical internet presence. They flood search engines with generic articles and fake social media profiles to bury the truth. If you search for Chase Montgomery right now, you will find a beautifully curated LinkedIn page and 3 incredibly vague articles about marketing synergy hosted on obscure blog sites. It is a manufactured identity designed to pass a superficial Google search. Megan sat down next to me, her eyes wide. So he never worked at Google at all. Not even for a single day, Andre confirmed. But it gets much worse. Harrison also claimed this guy is an Ivy League prodigy. I have access to the National Student Clearinghouse database. It is the centralized system every employer uses to verify university degrees. I ran a degree verification for Chase Montgomery across every Ivy League institution. Andre hit a key, and a massive red banner appeared on his screen. The text was glaringly simple. No records found. He has no degree, I whispered, remembering how Harrison had used that exact fake credential to belittle my state school education just hours ago. He gaslit me about my intelligence using a degree that does not even exist. Andre leaned back in his chair. He does not have an Ivy League degree under the name Chase Montgomery, because that is not his real legal name. My breath caught in my throat. What is his real name? Andre's fingers flew across the keyboard again. When people change their names to hide from their past, they rarely change their social security number because it makes it impossible to open bank accounts or sign leases. I ran a cross-reference on the corporate registration for his new luxury apartment lease, which was filed through your agency relocation package. I pulled the original signatory document. He clicked open a scanned PDF of a lease agreement. I zoomed in on the signature line. The handwriting was aggressive and flashy. The name printed underneath it was Charles Davenport. I stared at the name, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. Charles Davenport. I took that name and ran it through the actual public records. Andre said, his voice tightening with a predator instinct. Charles Davenport did not go to an Ivy League school. He attended a community college in Nevada for exactly 3 semesters before dropping out entirely. He has zero background in digital marketing. Before he showed up at your agency in a cashmere sweater, his last verifiable employment was managing a failed logistics warehouse in California. I sat back on my stool, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the lie. The vice president of my agency had handed the most profitable department in the company and the $15 million Zenith pitch to a community college dropout with a fake name. Why, I asked the question tearing out of me. Why would Harrison do this? If Charles Davenport is completely unqualified, why give him the keys to the kingdom? Harrison is risking his entire career and the agency reputation on a guy who cannot even run a basic spreadsheet. Because Harrison does not care about the agency reputation, Andre said grimly. Harrison cares about extracting capital. I told you earlier that corrupt executives do not sabotage their own operations unless it is a smokescreen for a financial play. You assume Harrison was tricked by this fake resume. You are looking at it from the perspective of an honest employee. Andre reached across the table and looked me directly in the eyes. Harrison was not tricked, Sloan. Harrison orchestrated this. He knew exactly who Charles Davenport was before he ever sent out that welcome email. He intentionally manufactured the Google backstory. He intentionally created the fake Ivy League pedigree. He built an impenetrable armor of fake credentials around Charles so that nobody at the agency would question why this random guy was suddenly put in charge of the biggest contract in company history. But why Megan echoed my confusion. What is the financial benefit of putting an idiot in charge? Because an idiot is easy to control, Andre explained smoothly. And an accomplice with a fake identity is exactly what you need when you are planning to steal $15 million from your own company. I shook my head, trying to connect the final dots. If Zenith signs the contract tomorrow, the agency gets the $15 million. It goes into the corporate accounts. How do Harrison and Charles get their hands on it? Vendor allocation, Andre stated simply. When you win a massive digital contract, the agency does not do all the work in-house. The senior creative director has the executive authority to outsource millions of dollars to third-party vendors for specialized services like server hosting, graphic production, and media buying. I gasped, the entire sinister architecture of their plan suddenly coming into perfect focus. Charles controls the vendor budget. Exactly. Andre nodded. Harrison pushed you into the basement and gave Charles total administrative control so Charles could unilaterally approve massive payouts to external vendors without your oversight. And I guarantee you, the vendors they plan to use do not actually exist. They are shell companies, I realized, feeling sick to my stomach. They are going to use my data models to win the Zenith pitch. Then Charles will use his fake authority to funnel millions of dollars of the Zenith budget out of the agency and directly into secret accounts controlled by Harrison. Andre closed his laptop with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Your boss is not just a toxic manager, Sloan. He is a criminal mastermind executing an inside job. He brought a ghost into your building to rob it blind. They thought you were just a naive data manager who would quietly step aside and take the blame when the money inevitably vanished. They thought you were entirely powerless. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They did not realize that you possess the one thing that can destroy their entire operation. You have the truth, and you have the mirror server. Tomorrow morning we are going to let them walk right into their own trap. But before we finalize this trap, Andre said, pulling his laptop back across the kitchen island, we need to know exactly how deep this relationship actually goes. People do not just randomly choose an accomplice for a $15 million corporate heist. There is always a history. There is always a trial run. Megan poured another round of decaf coffee. The atmosphere in the kitchen completely transformed from a casual family dinner into a high-stakes legal war room. I took a sip from my mug, feeling the caffeine mix with the residual adrenaline in my system. You said Charles Davenport last known employment was managing a logistics warehouse in California, I said, leaning closer to the glowing screen. How does a warehouse manager pivot to executing a massive digital agency fraud? Andre's fingers began flying across the keys again, pulling up the State of California Business Registry. Because it was not a warehouse, Andre corrected his eyes, scanning a wall of digital text. The property was registered as a warehouse for tax purposes, but the actual corporate entity filed at that address was a technology startup called Apex Logistics Solutions. Charles Davenport was listed as the sole founder and chief executive officer. I stared at the screen. A tech startup. Listen to this corporate mandate, Andre read directly from the filing. Apex Logistics Solutions was founded to revolutionize supply chain management through disruptive, predictive algorithms. Does that terminology sound familiar to you? A cold chill went down my spine. Disruptive, predictive algorithms. It was the exact same meaningless jargon Chase had used during his stolen presentation today. He was recycling his old script. He ran a fake tech company. I realized the pieces rapidly falling into place. He ran a highly lucrative fake tech company, Andre corrected, pulling up a financial disclosure form. According to these SEC filings, Charles managed to raise exactly $2.4 million in angel investor capital to build his proprietary software. The company operated for exactly 8 months. They leased expensive office space, bought high-end servers, and attended luxury tech conferences, but they never shipped a single line of actual code. They never hired a real engineering team. What happened to the $2.4 million? Megan asked, staring at the screen in horror. That is where the story gets incredibly dark, Andre replied. 8 months after securing the funding, Apex Logistics Solutions filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company dissolved overnight. But when the bankruptcy courts audited the remaining assets, the capital was completely gone. The accounts were drained. Charles Davenport claimed the money was lost in aggressive marketing campaigns and failed server infrastructure. But it was not lost, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He embezzled it. Exactly. Andre nodded grimly. The financial records show a series of massive payouts to external consulting firms right before the bankruptcy was filed. Sound familiar? He used shell companies to siphon the investor capital out of the startup, claiming they were legitimate business expenses. It was a textbook embezzlement scheme. Then why is Charles Davenport not in federal prison? I asked, my frustration mounting. If the bankruptcy court saw the money missing, why did the lead investor not file criminal fraud charges? Andre leaned back in his chair, a cynical smile forming on his face. Because the lead investor signed a massive non-disclosure agreement to settle the matter privately. In the corporate world, if the victim refuses to press charges and signs a civil settlement, the criminal investigation usually dies quietly. Wealthy investors hate public embarrassment. They would rather take a total loss and bury the story than go on public record admitting they were conned by a community college dropout. Andre opened a highly secure legal database, his screen turning dark blue as he accessed sealed court records. It took him a few minutes of intense typing to bypass the public-facing redactions. The settlement documents are sealed, Andre explained, his eyes narrowed in concentration. But the civil docket lists the plaintiff, the person who provided the $2.4 million, the person who signed the non-disclosure agreement to keep Charles Davenport out of prison. Andre hit the enter key one final time. A scanned legal document materialized on the screen. He pointed his pen at the signature line at the bottom of the page. I leaned in and read the name printed beneath the heavy black ink. It was Harrison. The air in the kitchen vanished. I stared at my boss' signature, the absolute reality of the situation crashing down on me with the force of a physical blow. Harrison was the lead investor in Apex Logistics Solutions. He was the one who gave Charles the $2.4 million. I do not understand, Megan said, her voice trembling. If Charles stole $2 million from Harrison, why on earth would Harrison hire him? Why would he bring the man who robbed him into his own agency and give him access to a $15 million contract? Because Harrison did not get robbed. I said the horrifying truth, suddenly crystal clear. I looked at Andre, who was nodding in absolute agreement. Harrison was not a victim. He was a co-conspirator. Andre closed the database, folding his hands on the table. You are looking at a beta test, Sloan. Apex Logistics was their first joint operation. Harrison used his own personal wealth to fund a fake startup. Charles acted as the frontman. Charles funneled the money into offshore shell companies they declared bankruptcy, and Harrison signed an NDA to legally shut down any further investigation. They washed $2 million of clean money into untraceable offshore accounts. And now they are doing it again, I whispered, feeling a wave of nausea hit my stomach. But this time they are not using Harrison personal money, they are using the agency money. They are using the Zenith contract, Andre confirmed. The $15 million pitch tomorrow is the main event. Harrison pushed you into the basement and demanded your proprietary data models because they needed a flawless, legitimate presentation to win the account. Once the agency secures the $15 million, Charles will use his fake authority as senior creative director to outsource the execution budget to their new network of shell companies. They are going to drain the agency dry, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. And when the executives finally realize the money is gone, Charles Davenport will disappear into the wind again. And who do you think Harrison will blame for the missing funds and the failed deliverables? Andre asked, looking at me with intense gravity. Me. I answered, the absolute cruelty of the plan sinking in. He legally transferred the master server controls to Charles, but the entire digital architecture still has my name on it. When the system fails and the money vanishes, Harrison will claim I sabotaged the infrastructure in a jealous rage. He will fire me. Charles will vanish, and Harrison will keep his hands entirely clean while sitting on millions in stolen funds. Megan covered her mouth in sheer horror. Sloan, they are setting you up to take the fall for a massive federal crime. I looked away from the screen, staring at the dark window of the kitchen. The sheer scale of their greed was terrifying. They had manufactured an entire corporate reality just to use me as their ultimate scapegoat. They thought they had backed me into a corner where I had absolutely no way out. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They did not know about Leo Mirror server. They did not know that I had legally extracted my team from their jurisdiction. And they certainly did not know that the live demonstration they were planning to show the CEO and the Zenith executives tomorrow was entirely rigged to self-destruct. Andre slowly closed his laptop, the silver lid snapping shut with finality. You have the motive, Sloan. You have the historical proof of their fraud, and you have the explosive payload ready to detonate on their own servers. The trap is perfectly built. I stood up from the kitchen island, feeling the exhaustion completely vanish from my body. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I was no longer a victim of a toxic workplace. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. Tomorrow morning, I said, looking at my sister and her husband, we do not just expose a bad presentation, we expose a federal conspiracy. I am going to let Chase press the button himself. I packed the signed employment contracts back into my briefcase and walked out into the cool night air. The final battle was set. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cool night air clear my head before turning back into the house. The final battle was set, but I needed absolute confirmation of their current mechanism. I walked back into the kitchen, dropping my heavy leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor. Andre was still sitting at the island, his laptop glowing brightly in the dim light. We know their past, I said, pulling my stool out and sitting back down. We know exactly how they executed the startup fraud. But a historical crime is not enough to stop the Zenith pitch tomorrow morning. We need the current weapon. We need to know exactly where the $15 million is officially scheduled to go. Andre smiled, a sharp, predatory expression spreading across his face. I am already 2 steps ahead of you, Sloan. He turned the silver screen toward me once again. While you were outside, I started tracking the vendor allocation requests Chase has been submitting to the agency accounting department this entire week. As senior creative director, he has the authority to pre-approve external vendor contracts for the Zenith account. He submitted 3 massive service agreements yesterday afternoon. Who are the vendors? Megan asked, leaning over my shoulder to look at the screen. That is the brilliant part, Andre explained. They are registered as digital infrastructure consultants. The primary vendor is a company called Apex Data Solutions. Does that sound familiar? Apex. I repeated, feeling a fresh surge of adrenaline. It is the exact same naming convention as their failed logistics startup. Andre nodded, tapping the screen. Criminals are incredibly lazy when they think nobody is watching. I ran a corporate trace on Apex Data Solutions. It is not registered in Illinois or California. It is a Delaware limited liability company. Delaware is the ultimate corporate tax haven in the United States. It allows businesses to register without publicly disclosing the names of their owners or executive officers. It is a financial black box designed entirely for corporate secrecy. So we cannot prove Harrison or Charles owns it, I said, feeling a sudden wave of frustration. You cannot prove it through the Delaware State Registry, Andre corrected smoothly. But you can prove it through their registered agent. Every Delaware shell company is legally required to have a registered agent to receive tax documents and legal notices. I pulled the incorporation papers for Apex Data Solutions. Andre opened a PDF of a tax document. The registered agent is a boutique law firm located in downtown Chicago. I cross-referenced the billing address for that specific law firm. He hit the enter key, bringing up a property deed. The billing address for the law firm managing the shell company is a luxury condominium in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The deed is registered to a private trust. The sole beneficiary of that private trust is Harrison. I stared at the deed. The final piece of the puzzle locked perfectly into place. It was the ultimate smoking gun. Harrison was legally bound to the shell company that Charles was actively preparing to flood with the Zenith budget. I leaned over the kitchen island, staring at the glowing screen as the sheer audacity of their plan fully materialized in my mind. They were not just planning to skim a little off the top of a standard account. Zenith was an e-commerce mega client. They were handing our agency $15 million to build a massive integrated national digital infrastructure. It was the kind of capital that could make or break a mid-sized firm in a single quarter, and Harrison was planning to steal every single cent of it. "Look at the vendor billing schedule," Andre said, pulling up another document Charles had submitted to accounting. Charles structured the external vendor payouts to front-load the capital. He set it up so that Apex Data Solutions receives a non-refundable $7 million infrastructure retainer the very same day Zenith signs the master contract. The remaining $8 million is scheduled to be distributed in monthly consulting fees over the next fiscal year. "They are going to drain the entire initial operating budget before the ink is even dry," Megan whispered, looking genuinely terrified by the scale of the theft. "The agency will have no money left to actually build the Zenith platform. They will default on the massive e-commerce contract within 30 days. And that is exactly when Charles Davenport will vanish again," I stated, my voice completely devoid of fear. "He will authorize the massive wire transfer to the Delaware Shell Company on Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, when the agency executives realize the money went to a phantom vendor, Charles will be a ghost. He will abandon his luxury apartment and his fake Google identity, leaving absolutely zero trace behind. And Harrison will play the outraged vice president," Andre added. "He will claim he was completely deceived by a highly sophisticated con artist. He will throw you under the bus, claiming your data department failed to properly vet the technical vendors. The agency will absorb the $15 million loss. They might even file for bankruptcy, and Harrison will quietly retire to his private trust in the Gold Coast, millions of dollars richer." The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. Harrison was willing to destroy hundreds of careers and bankrupt his own agency just to secure his own early retirement. He looked at me, a dedicated employee who had spent 6 years building his most profitable department, and saw nothing but a convenient scapegoat. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the final traces of my corporate loyalty burn away into ash. The woman who walked into the basement on Monday morning, terrified of losing her job, no longer existed. Tomorrow, I was walking into that boardroom as an executioner. Let them pitch their stolen presentation. Let them try to claim my data as their own. When they activate that poisoned server, they are not just going to fail the pitch. They are going to expose their entire criminal syndicate on a massive projector in front of the CEO. The deed faded from the screen as Andre closed the window, replacing it with a blank legal document. The realization of the $15 million heist was entirely consuming, but we could not afford to sit in shock. Knowing the crime was only half the battle. Surviving the blast radius was the actual war. When the mirror server detonated in the boardroom tomorrow, the damage would be catastrophic. The agency would collapse into absolute chaos. Federal regulators would inevitably get involved, and Harrison would frantically look for a scapegoat to absorb the legal liability. I had to ensure my new company was an impenetrable fortress before the sun came up. Andre cracked his knuckles, shifting fully into his role as a ruthless corporate defense attorney. "We registered your independent digital marketing LLC last week." He began, his voice rapid and precise. "We secured the state licenses, and tonight, Kira and Leo signed their founding partner contracts. The internal structure is built. But a structure is utterly useless if it is vulnerable to a hostile siege. Tomorrow, when Harrison realizes his shell company is exposed, his first instinct as a cornered executive will be to file an emergency injunction against you. He will utilize the massive resources of the agency legal department to claim you stole trade secrets to start a competing firm." I nodded, pulling a yellow legal pad toward me. "He will try to freeze our operating accounts immediately. and drag us into a protracted legal battle we cannot financially survive. We have to preemptively disarm him. He thinks because I am a woman in middle management, I will easily fold under the threat of endless corporate litigation. I need a shield he cannot pierce. Exactly, Andre said, typing a bold heading onto his blank document. Which is why your LLC cannot just be categorized as a standard digital marketing firm. We are structuring the primary operational articles as a highly specialized crisis management and data recovery consultancy. This is the ultimate legal blueprint. You are not competing with the agency. You are providing an emergency service the agency is fundamentally incapable of providing once their core infrastructure fails. I stared at him, the sheer brilliance of the strategy washing over me. If we register as a standard marketing agency, Harrison can easily claim tortious interference if we ever speak to Zenith. But if we are a data recovery consultancy, we operate in an entirely different corporate classification. We are no longer competitors. We are first responders. Andre smiled, pointing his silver pen at me. You are catching on quickly. When Charles and Harrison trigger the poison server tomorrow morning, they will completely corrupt the agency network. The Zenith executives will sit in that boardroom and watch their $15 million investment evaporate into a digital void. Absolute panic will set in. The CEO will demand an immediate technical solution. Harrison will have absolutely no idea how to fix it because Charles is a fraud who cannot code a basic HTML page. And that is when I introduced the solution I finished for him, my mind racing ahead of the conversation. I do not solicit Zenith directly. I offer my LLC to the agency CEO as a third-party crisis contractor to restore the corrupted data models. Andre typed the clause onto the screen. We draft an airtight contingency contract tonight. It will explicitly state that your new LLC will restore the Zenith data models, but only if the agency fully releases you, Kira and Leo, from all previous non-disclosure agreements and non-compete clauses in perpetuity. Furthermore, the agency must legally acknowledge that all restored proprietary algorithms belong exclusively to your LLC, and they are merely licensing them for the duration of the Zenith presentation. It is corporate extortion, Megan said, from the other side of the kitchen, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and absolute admiration. You are going to hold the Zenith account hostage until the CEO signs away all of Harrison leverage. It is not extortion, Andre corrected smoothly, leaning back in his chair. It is aggressive corporate negotiation in the face of an existential threat. The CEO will be staring down the barrel of a $15 million breach of contract lawsuit from his biggest client. He will sign anything Sloan puts in front of him to save the deal and protect his own job. By the time Harrison realizes what is happening, the CEO will have legally transferred the ownership of the entire digital infrastructure directly to Sloan. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. The trap was no longer just about exposing the fraud or securing a minor victory. It was about leveraging their own destruction to legally legitimize my new empire. But there was still one glaring vulnerability that kept my heart racing. What about the federal investigation? I asked, leaning forward over the kitchen island. When the CEO inevitably realizes Harrison and Charles set up a shell company to embezzle the funds he is going to call the authorities, the FBI will audit every single department. They will look at the timing of my sudden departure and the creation of my LLC. They might suspect I was involved in the financial manipulation to clear my own path. I need total legal immunity from the embezzlement scheme. Andre nodded, his expression turning deadly serious. That is the most critical part of this blueprint. We have to build an unassailable firewall between your operations and Charles' vendor allocations. I am drafting a preemptive whistleblower disclosure right now. He opened a new, highly secure encrypted file. Tonight before midnight, we are filing a formal date-stamped report with the Securities and Exchange Commission tip line. We are submitting the public records of Apex Data Solutions, the undeniable connection to Harrison Private Trust, and the fraudulent vendor allocations Charles submitted to accounting this week. We are doing it anonymously, but we are routing the submission through the dedicated IP address of your new LLC. I looked at him in sheer disbelief. We are reporting them to the federal government before the crime even happens. We are establishing a documented federal timeline, Andre explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. When the FBI eventually audits the agency, they will find this time-stamped SEC report. It will legally prove that your LLC was acting as a whistleblower, actively identifying the corporate fraud before the presentation even occurred. It grants you absolute federal protection. You cannot be charged as a co-conspirator if you are the exact entity that formally reported the conspiracy to the government. It was flawless. The legal blueprint covered every single angle. It weaponized their own sabotage legally, acquired the proprietary data, forced the CEO to sign away the non-competes, and provided total federal immunity from the ensuing criminal fallout. Harrison had spent weeks building a trap for me, relying on my assumed compliance and fear as a female subordinate. Instead, I had spent the entire week building a legal guillotine, and he was about to place his own head directly on the block. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was past midnight. Friday morning had officially arrived. The $15 million Zenith pitch was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp in the main executive boardroom. I stood up from the kitchen island, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. The crushing exhaustion was gone, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a woman ready to reclaim her professional identity and her worth. I packed my legal pads and the drafted contingency contracts into my heavy leather briefcase. I looked at Andre and Megan, deeply grateful for their unwavering support. "Get some sleep," Andre said, closing his laptop. "Tomorrow is going to be the most chaotic day in the history of that agency." "I am not going to sleep," I replied, walking toward the front door. "I am going to go home, shower, and put on the most expensive tailored suit I own. Because tomorrow, I am not just an employee attending a mandatory meeting. I am a chief executive officer stepping into a war zone, and I plan to win." Friday morning arrived with a brutal, freezing downpour that violently battered my windshield as I drove into the desolate streets of downtown Chicago. I had not slept. Instead, I spent the early hours meticulously preparing for the execution. I showered, styled my hair into a sharp, commanding look, and put on a charcoal gray tailored suit that projected absolute executive authority. It was the exact type of armor you wore to systematically dismantle a corrupt corporation. I pulled into the damp underground garage at exactly 6 o'clock sharp. The building was a complete ghost town. I swiped my security badge and pressed the button for the basement. The heavy doors slid open to reveal our freezing subterranean exile. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a place of corporate punishment. It was a tactical war room. Kira and Leo were sitting at their folding tables. They looked completely exhausted, running on pure caffeine and residual anger, but their eyes were incredibly sharp. The master console of the mirror server hummed loudly, a steady green light indicating that our parallel network was fully operational and perfectly hidden from the main mainframe. I walked across the cracked concrete floor, my heels echoing sharply in the cavernous space, and dropped my heavy leather briefcase onto the center table. "Are we ready?" Leo asked, sitting up straight. "The Trojan Horse Protocol is fully integrated into the primary presentation file. The moment Charles presses enter on the Zenith title slide, the main server will encounter a catastrophic authentication loop. We are ready for the technical detonation," I replied, unlocking the brass clasps on my briefcase. "But the parameters changed last night. The situation is drastically worse." Kira sat up straight. "What do you mean?" "We know they are stealing our data." I pulled out the thick stack of legal documents Andre printed and laid them flat. "They are stealing the entire agency." I spent the night pulling public registry files for Charles Davenport. He is a community college dropout who previously ran a fake logistics startup with Harrison. Leo stared at me, the blood draining from his face. "A fake startup?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And they are executing the exact same playbook today. Charles submitted vendor allocation requests to accounting yesterday." The moment the CEO signs the $15 million Zenith contract, Charles will wire a $7 million non-refundable retainer to a Delaware shell company called Apex Data Solutions. The shell company is legally tied to a private trust owned entirely by Harrison. They plan to drain the operating budget by Monday, and then Charles will vanish. The basement was absolutely silent. Kira covered her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "They are going to bankrupt the agency," she whispered. "And when the money is gone, they will blame us. They have our names on all the server architecture." "That was their plan," I stated. "They pushed us down here to ensure we had no visibility into executive financial channels. But Andre and I drafted a new legal blueprint at midnight. We are not just going to watch them fail. We are legally taking ownership of the Zenith account." I pushed 2 fresh contracts across the table. "You signed your equity partnerships yesterday," I explained. "But these are the final operational agreements for our new LLC. We registered the firm as an emergency data recovery consultancy. Furthermore, Andre filed a time-stamped whistleblower report with the federal government at 1 this morning. We have total legal immunity." Leo picked up the contract, scanning the aggressive legal language. "You want us to fix the server after Charles breaks it?" "No," I corrected sharply. "I want us to hold the Zenith data hostage. When Charles triggers the Trojan horse, the agency network will violently collapse. The CEO will face a breach of contract and public humiliation. We will step into that boardroom as an independent contractor. We will offer to instantly restore the presentation, but only if the CEO signs a binding contract transferring the ownership of the proprietary algorithms directly to our firm." Kira gasped, a smile slowly breaking across her face. "We force the CEO to buy back our stolen data. We force him to fire Harrison and hire us," I replied. "Once we trigger this sequence, there is absolutely no going back. We are declaring open corporate warfare. Are you with me?" Leo did not hesitate. He grabbed a pen, flipped to the back page of the crisis management contract, and signed his name with a heavy stroke. "Let them burn." Kira picked up her pen, her hands no longer shaking. She signed her name right next to Leo. "We built this infrastructure, Sloan. It belongs to us." I took the signed documents, verifying the signatures before securing them inside my briefcase. The loyalists were fully locked in. The trap was armed, the legal shields were raised, and the protections were actively in place. "Pack your personal belongings," I ordered, checking my watch. "It is 7 o'clock. We wipe all our local hard drives down here. Leave absolutely nothing on these computers except the poisoned presentation file." At 8:45, we take the elevator up to the executive floor. "We are going to the main executive boardroom?" Leo asked, looking confused. "We were explicitly uninvited by Harrison." I smiled, feeling the cold, ruthless anticipation settling deep in my chest. "We are not attending the pitch as compliant employees. We are attending as the elite independent rescue team. Let us go introduce Charles Davenport and his fabricated Google credentials to the very real corporate world." The 3 of us stood up in unison, united by a shared, unbreakable resolve. We methodically wiped the basement servers completely clean, permanently, erasing every single trace of our 6 long years of dedicated service to the agency. We were leaving this concrete basement for the last time, ascending to the luxury executive suite to watch a corrupt vice president lose his entire stolen empire. But before we could even reach the heavy metal door, it violently swung open. Chase stood in the doorway, completely blocking our exit. For the first time since he arrived at the agency, his perfectly curated Google executive persona was cracking. He was breathing heavily, his designer silk tie was slightly loosened, and a thin layer of cold sweat coated his forehead. He looked exactly like a panicked community college dropout who had just realized he was completely out of his depth. "I need the final predictive data model," Chase demanded, his voice completely lacking its usual arrogant drawl. "The Zenith Information Security team just arrived. They are requiring the presentation to be run entirely offline from a localized machine to prevent corporate espionage. I cannot access your cloud server from the boardroom podium. I need the master files on a physical drive right now." I looked at Leo, carefully masking the massive surge of triumph I felt. We had anticipated this exact technical vulnerability. Zenith was a multi-billion-dollar e-commerce giant. They never allowed third-party agencies to run live pitches on open internet connections. Chase should have known this standard protocol, but because he was a complete fraud, he was scrambling at the absolute last minute. The master files are highly complex, Chase, I said, keeping my voice smooth and professionally subservient. They require a specific compilation sequence. I do not care about your technical jargon, Sloan, he snapped, stepping further into the freezing basement. Harrison said you finished the data models yesterday. Put them on a flash drive. If I walk into that boardroom empty-handed, I will have you fired for gross insubordination before the CEO even sits down. I walked slowly back to my wiped computer terminal. I reached into my tailored suit pocket and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. I did not need to compile anything. The drive was already loaded with the Trojan horse. I had spent the entire night engineering the dummy code trap with Leo. We had to ensure it would effortlessly bypass standard antivirus protocols while appearing completely legitimate. On the surface, the file structure looked exactly like a standard $15 million digital infrastructure pitch. It had the correct file extensions, the Zenith corporate branding, and the intricate folders labeled predictive algorithms and demographic mapping. But the core architecture was completely hollow. Instead of actual marketing data, I had built a self-executing diagnostic loop. I designed the dummy code to remain entirely dormant until Chase clicked on the third slide of the presentation, which was the financial allocation projection. The moment he pressed enter on that specific slide, the Trojan horse would activate. It was programmed to instantly bypass the localized machine force and emergency hardline connection to the agency main server and execute a catastrophic brute force query. But the absolute brilliance of the trap was not just the massive system crash. I had engineered the dummy code to aggressively pull the exact financial documents Andre had uncovered. When the system failed, it would not just show a blank black screen. It was explicitly programmed to project the hidden vendor allocation requests, the Delaware Shell Company registrations, and the fraudulent wire transfers directly onto the massive boardroom projector. "Are you actively listening to me?" Chase yelled, slamming his hand heavily against the folding table. "Give me the drive." I held up the silver flash drive, letting it catch the harsh fluorescent light. "The files are fully compiled and ready for execution," I stated calmly. "But you must follow the precise loading protocol. When you plug this into the boardroom laptop, the system will ask for administrative permission to run the predictive data models. You must click Authorize." Chase snatched the drive directly from my hand, his face twisting into a sneer of absolute contempt. "I know how to plug in a basic hard drive, Sloan. Do not speak to me like I am an idiot. You and your little basement team stay down here until the pitch is over. I do not want you anywhere near the executive floor while I close this deal." He turned around and marched rapidly out of the basement, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him. The loud echo rang through the empty concrete room. Kira let out a long, shaky breath. He actually took it. He did not even verify the file sizes or run a basic diagnostic check. "He does not know how to run a diagnostic check," Leo said, a sharp, vindictive grin spreading across his face. "He is just going to plug it in and press play." I looked at my watch. It was 8:50 in the morning. Zenith was sitting in the boardroom. The CEO was waiting. Harrison was likely sitting at the executive table, entirely confident that his $15 million heist was perfectly secured. And Chase was currently walking into the room carrying a digital hand grenade that I had personally handed to him. "Grab your briefcases," I ordered, picking up my heavy leather bag containing our new corporate contracts. Chase told us to stay in the basement. But as of an hour ago, we no longer work for this agency. We walked out of the basement and approached the main elevator bank. I pressed the glowing button for the top floor. The elevator arrived with a soft digital chime. We stepped inside the polished steel cabin, the doors sliding shut, completely sealing our fate. As the elevator rapidly ascended, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Every single moment of professional humiliation, every stolen idea, and every manipulative conversation with Harrison had led to this exact mechanical ascent. I was not just going to expose a bad manager. I was going to systematically dismantle a criminal enterprise in real time. The elevator slowed, coming to a smooth halt. The digital display above the door illuminated with a bright red number 50. The executive floor. The doors slid open, revealing the plush carpet and the expansive glass walls of the corporate suite. The receptionist was away from her desk, likely assisting with the massive presentation. The hallway was completely empty, but I could hear the faint murmur of voices coming from the main boardroom at the end of the long corridor. We stepped out of the elevator in unison. We did not hesitate. We marched straight down the hallway, our footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Through the frosted glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the silhouettes of 20 executives taking their seats. I saw the towering figure of the CEO at the head of the long mahogany table, and I saw Chase standing at the front podium confidently holding up the silver flash drive. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. The countdown had officially begun. We stood in the silent hallway, our reflections barely visible in the heavy frosted glass of the boardroom walls. Inside the expansive room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The Zenith delegation sat shoulder to shoulder along the left side of the polished mahogany table. There were 8 of them in total, dressed in immaculate dark navy suits, their expressions completely unreadable. These were the elite decision-makers of a global electronic commerce empire. They were not here to be entertained by flashy marketing jargon. They were here to audit a $15 million digital infrastructure proposal. At the head of the table sat our agency chief executive officer, a man whose entire legacy currently rested on the outcome of this single morning. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his eyes locked intensely on the front podium. Sitting directly to his right was Harrison. My former boss looked incredibly relaxed. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit, leaning back in his expensive leather chair with a faint, arrogant smile playing across his lips. To the untrained eye, he looked like a confident vice president about to secure a massive victory, but I knew exactly what that smile meant. He was mentally counting the $7 million he believed was about to be wired directly into his secret Delaware shell company. And then there was Chase. He stood confidently behind the sleek acrylic podium at the front of the room. The massive projector screen behind him was currently blank, casting a harsh white glow across his face. He held the silver flash drive in his right hand, casually flipping it between his fingers like a cheap toy. He was completely in his element, playing the role of the visionary tech genius for an audience of billionaires. I placed my hand flat against the cold glass, watching his every move. Beside me, Leo checked his digital watch, his jaw tightly clenched. Kira stood absolutely still, her eyes relentlessly tracking the flash drive. Chase finally stopped flipping the drive and inserted it into the localized boardroom laptop resting on the podium. The Zenith Information Security Protocol immediately recognized the external hardware. A large security prompt flashed onto the massive projector screen behind him. It was a stark gray box with bold black text clearly visible to everyone in the room. The system was demanding administrative authorization to run the proprietary predictive data models from an unverified external source. This was the final fail-safe. A legitimate Google executive or a highly trained data architect would have recognized that a standard presentation file should never trigger an administrative security override. A real developer would have instantly stopped the presentation, pulled the drive out of the machine, and checked the core source code for a malicious payload. But Chase was not a developer. He was a community college dropout who had never written a single line of code in his entire life. Through the glass, I watched him glance at the security prompt with absolute annoyance. He did not read the warning text. He did not hesitate to question the anomaly. He simply reached out and clicked the authorize button with arrogant finality. A small loading bar appeared on the screen, rapidly filling with bright green light. The system officially accepted the fake algorithm. The dummy code successfully bypassed the Zenith localized security net and silently established a hidden forced hardline connection directly to the main agency mainframe. The trap was fully armed. The Trojan horse was officially inside the network. Chase turned away from the screen, flashing a brilliant, completely manufactured smile at the Zenith delegation. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice easily carrying through the thin gap in the boardroom doors. "My name is Chase Montgomery. I am the senior creative director here, and I recently joined this incredible team after spending several years optimizing the digital ecosystem over at Google. I felt a sharp spike of genuine disgust. He was actually using the fabricated Google credential right out of the gate to establish false authority. The Zenith executives nodded politely, clearly impressed by the fake pedigree. Harrison beamed with manufactured pride, nodding encouragingly at his accomplice from across the room. Today, we are not just going to show you a marketing strategy. Chase continued pacing slowly away from the podium to command the center of the room. We are going to show you a fundamental digital revolution. We have compiled a proprietary algorithmic framework that will completely disrupt your current supply chain latency. Leo leaned closer to me, his voice a barely audible whisper. He is using the exact same meaningless buzzwords from his fake logistics startup. He is literally recycling his bankruptcy script for a $15 million pitch. I nodded, never taking my eyes off the room. It works on investors who do not understand technology. But look at the Zenith lead engineer. I pointed to a woman sitting near the end of the table. Unlike the other executives, she was not smiling. She was staring at Chase with a look of intense professional skepticism. She had a highly technical background, and she could already smell the absolute lack of substance in his opening monologue. But Chase was entirely oblivious to her suspicion. He pressed the remote clicker in his hand. The projector screen flashed, bringing up the first slide. It was a massive, beautifully designed title card displaying the Zenith corporate logo floating above a complex web of interconnected digital nodes. It looked incredibly expensive and highly sophisticated. It was a visual masterpiece that my team had spent 3 sleepless weeks designing, and he was currently using it to rob our company blind. As we discussed in our preliminary meetings, Chase projected his voice with practiced theatricality. True electronic commerce dominance requires flawless demographic mapping. We have to anticipate the consumer action before the consumer even logs onto the platform. Let us look at the current architecture. He pressed the clicker again. The screen transitioned smoothly to the second slide. This slide displayed a massive interactive map of the United States, highlighting consumer density zones in bright thermal colors. The Zenith executives leaned forward, clearly engaged by the sheer quality of the data visualization. Harrison crossed his arms, looking around the room to gauge their positive reaction. He was completely convinced that the heist was perfectly on track. "One more slide," Kira whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of sheer terror and massive adrenaline. "The financial allocation projection is next." My heart hammered against my ribs like a physical drum. I gripped the handle of my heavy leather briefcase, feeling the solid weight of the crisis management contracts inside. Everything we had sacrificed every late night in the freezing basement and every moment of profound disrespect culminated in this exact 10 seconds. Chase turned back to the screen, completely unaware that he was standing on a digital landmine. He raised his hand, pointing at the thermal map to emphasize a completely fabricated point about server synergy. He was smiling. He was victorious. He thought he had already won. He raised the remote clicker, his thumb resting lightly on the button, preparing to transition to the third slide. The small mechanical click of the remote echoed sharply in the silent boardroom. For a fraction of a second, absolutely nothing happened. Chase held his confident pose, waiting for the financial allocation graph to appear, but the screen did not transition. Instead, the projector let out a high-pitched electronic whine. The beautiful Zenith title slide violently glitched, tearing into jagged pixels before the entire massive screen snapped completely black. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the Zenith delegation. Chase frowned, lowering the clicker. He tapped the spacebar on the localized laptop. Nothing happened. He forcefully smacked the side of the keyboard. "Apologies for the slight technical delay," Chase said, his voice tightening with the first genuine trace of panic. "Just a minor digital lag vibe. We will have it back up in 1 second." He reached for the silver flash drive, intending to pull it out and restart the machine. But the moment his fingers brushed the metal casing, the laptop fan roared to life, spinning at maximum capacity like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. The Trojan horse had officially bypassed the local environment. It aggressively punched through the agency firewall and established an unbreakable hardline connection directly to the main server architecture. Suddenly, the massive projector screen ignited with blinding white light. But it was not the presentation. It was a raw command terminal. Lines of heavy green code began scrolling down the screen at a dizzying speed, executing the brute force query I had meticulously designed in the basement. "What is this?" the Zenith lead engineer demanded, immediately standing up from her leather chair. "That is not a presentation file. That is a force directory extraction. Who is pulling data from our localized machine?" "Nobody is pulling data," Harrison interjected quickly, standing up from his seat next to the CEO. "It is just a formatting error. Chase, shut the machine down. Pull the drive out right now." Chase grabbed the silver flash drive and yanked it out of the USB port with all his strength. He held it up triumphantly, expecting the screen to go dark. But the screen did not go dark. The forced connection had already embedded itself into the mainframe. The laptop was now completely irrelevant. The agency server was actively bleeding out onto the boardroom wall. "I cannot shut it down," Chase stammered frantically, pressing the laptop power button over and over again. "The keyboard is totally locked." The rapid scrolling of green code suddenly stopped. A massive red warning banner flashed across the top of the projector screen. It read in bold white letters, "Unauthorized financial allocation detected. Initiating transparency protocol." The CEO stood up, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "Harrison, what is the meaning of this? What transparency protocol? This is a closed network pitch." Before Harrison could formulate a lie, the screen shifted again. The raw code dissolved, instantly replaced by a massive high-resolution projection of the vendor allocation requests Chase had submitted to accounting yesterday. The document was magnified to 10 feet tall. Every single Zenith executive in the room could clearly read the bold text: $7 million, non-refundable infrastructure retainer, payable immediately upon contract signing to Apex Data Solutions. The CEO stared at the screen, his eyes wide with utter shock. He looked at the Zenith delegation, then turned furiously to Harrison. "We have not even signed the contract yet. Why is your senior creative director pre-authorizing a $7 million payout to an external vendor? Who the hell is Apex Data Solutions?" Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. His arrogant, custom-tailored persona completely evaporated. He was staring at the massive document on the wall like a man watching his own execution. The trap had closed with terrifying precision. The screen did not wait for his answer. The Trojan horse executed its next command. The vendor allocation document faded instantly, replaced by the Delaware State Business Registry filing for Apex Data Solutions. The text was crystal clear. It highlighted the corporate structure of the LLC, proving it was a completely anonymous shell company with absolutely no operating history, no actual employees, and no physical office space. "This is a shell corporation," the Zenith lead engineer stated loudly, her voice echoing off the boardroom walls. "Your agency is planning to funnel half of our operating budget into a phantom entity. This is an active financial fraud." The room erupted into absolute chaos. The Zenith executives stood up aggressively, shoving their chairs back. They were shouting, pointing at the screen, and demanding immediate answers. The CEO was screaming at Harrison, demanding to know who authorized the Delaware registration. But the absolute final blow had not yet been struck. The dummy code had one last file to project. The Delaware registry faded, replaced by the highly secure date-stamped property deed Andre had extracted last night. It was the deed for the Gold Coast luxury condominium, serving as the billing address for the shell company registered agent. The projection zoomed in violently on the final signature line, magnifying it so large that it dominated the entire room. The private trust beneficiary was clearly printed in bold black ink: Harrison. The boardroom went dead silent. The screaming abruptly stopped. The CEO slowly turned his head, staring at the 10-foot-tall projection of his vice president legal name, directly tying him to the fraudulent shell company. The undeniable proof of a $15 million inside job was currently illuminating the room. Harrison's legs gave out. He collapsed heavily back into his leather chair, his face completely drained of blood. He looked like a corpse. He slowly turned his head to look at Chase, who was backed into the corner behind the podium, hyperventilating in sheer panic. The community college dropout had just broadcasted a federal crime to a room full of billionaires. The Zenith delegation did not wait for an explanation. The lead engineer grabbed her briefcase and marched directly toward the boardroom doors. "We are leaving," she announced with absolute disgust. "This entire agency is a criminal syndicate. Consider our verbal agreement permanently terminated. We will be contacting the federal authorities immediately." The CEO scrambled around the table, desperately trying to physically block the door. "Please, you must listen to me. I had absolutely no knowledge of this. This is a rogue executive. I can fix this. We can restructure the entire contract right now. You cannot fix anything," the lead engineer snapped, shoving past him. "Your entire digital infrastructure is currently compromised by your own people. You do not even have control of your own servers. We are done." I stood in the hallway, watching the absolute destruction unfold through the frosted glass. The $15 million deal was dead. Harrison's career was permanently over. Chase was likely going to federal prison. The CEO was actively watching his entire agency collapse into ruin. It was a perfectly orchestrated disaster, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I looked at Kira and Leo. They were both smiling, the heavy weight of their corporate oppression entirely lifted. I adjusted the collar of my charcoal gray suit and firmly gripped the handle of my briefcase. The agency was burning to the ground, but the Zenith executives still desperately needed a digital infrastructure built, and I was the only person in the entire building who legally possessed the proprietary algorithms to do it. "It is time," I said softly. I stepped forward and placed my hand on the heavy silver handle of the boardroom door. I pushed it open and walked confidently directly into the blast radius. I stepped directly into the path of the fleeing Zenith executives. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me, sealing Kira, Leo, and myself securely inside the boardroom. The sheer volume of the shouting was deafening. The CEO was completely red in the face, practically cornering Harrison against the expansive glass window, overlooking the dreary Chicago skyline. The $15 million deal was dissolving into total anarchy, and the massive projector screen was still glaring with the undeniable proof of the embezzlement scheme. "Get the basement on the phone right now!" The CEO roared at an executive assistant who was frozen in fear against the wall. "I want the lead server architect up here before I call the police. I need this terminal shut down." Harrison looked up and saw me standing calmly by the doorway. A look of desperate, pathetic relief washed over his pale, sweating face. He pushed past the furious CEO, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "Sloan, thank God you are here," Harrison demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Get over to that podium right now. The presentation file is completely corrupted. We have a massive systemic breach from an external hack. You need to shut down the forced terminal, bypass the proxy, and reboot the localized machine. Fix this mess immediately, or I swear I will ruin your entire career." I did not move a single inch. I stood exactly where I was, flanked closely by Kira and Leo, gripping the heavy handle of my leather briefcase. I looked at the man who had stolen my credit, marginalized my team, and tried to rob the company blind. "I cannot do that, Harrison," I replied, my voice projecting clearly and calmly over the chaos of the room. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" Harrison screamed, stepping closer, his arrogance replaced by pure, unfiltered desperation. "You are the director of digital marketing. You built the internal architecture. Go to the terminal and type the override sequence. Now." "I mean that I do not work for you anymore," I stated coldly, enjoying the sharp look of confusion that crossed his face. "And I certainly do not fix the disastrous mistakes of your fraudulent hires." Chase, who was still backed into the corner behind the podium, suddenly found his voice. "She did this," he yelled, pointing frantically at me like a cornered animal. "She handed me the flash drive in the basement. She must have planted a malicious virus on it. She is actively trying to sabotage the pitch because she is jealous." The Zenith lead engineer, who was halfway out the door, suddenly stopped. She turned around, narrowing her sharp eyes at Chase, and then looked directly at me. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that cut right through the heavy tension in the boardroom. A virus, I repeated, looking at Chase with absolute, undeniable disdain. Chase, you are standing in front of the elite lead engineering team for a multi-billion-dollar electronic commerce giant. Do not insult their intelligence with your profound ignorance. That is not a virus on the screen behind you. That is a targeted directory extraction pulling specific financial ledgers from your own internal accounting folders. A virus destroys random data. This code is explicitly exposing hidden data, and you personally authorized it. She is right, the CEO shouted, turning his intense wrath back onto Chase. You bypassed the security prompt. I watched you click authorize with my own eyes. She handed me the drive, Chase stammered, sweating so profusely it dripped onto his expensive silk tie. I did not know what was actually on it. Because you do not know how to read code. Charles said, using his real legal name for the very first time. I watched his entire body physically flinch as the fake persona shattered completely. You are a community college dropout who ran a bankrupt logistics startup called Apex. You do not know the fundamental difference between a predictive algorithm and a basic diagnostic loop. You plugged in an unverified drive, clicked accept, and blindly triggered a transparency protocol that broadcasted your federal crimes to a room full of witnesses. The Zenith lead engineer took a slow, deliberate step back toward the mahogany table, crossing her arms. The rest of her delegation mirrored her movement, sensing a massive shift in the power dynamic. Who exactly are you? She asked, completely ignoring the CEO and Harrison. My name is Sloan, I said, maintaining direct, confident eye contact with her. Until 8 o'clock this morning, I was the head of the digital marketing department here. These are my top architects, Kira and Leo. We designed the proprietary algorithmic framework that Zenith explicitly requires for this massive infrastructure upgrade. If you work for this agency, you are part of this criminal syndicate, the Zenith engineer stated bluntly, her tone testing my resolve. We do not do business with thieves. We do not work for this agency, I corrected, stepping forward and opening my leather briefcase. And we are the ones who stopped the crime. I pulled out the thick stack of legal documents and slapped them firmly onto the polished mahogany table. The loud smack silenced the few remaining murmurs in the massive room. At 1 o'clock this morning, I explained, looking directly at the Zenith delegation, my attorney filed a time-stamped whistleblower report with the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. We officially documented the entire embezzlement conspiracy orchestrated by Vice President Harrison and his accomplice Charles Davenport. The federal government has granted my team total legal immunity. Harrison let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward until he hit the glass wall. You went to the SEC, he whispered in total, unadulterated horror. You went to the federal government. I went straight to the top, Harrison, I said, without even looking at him. Your shell company in Delaware is currently being frozen by federal investigators. Your private trust is completely exposed. The $7 million you plan to steal today is never leaving the agency accounting department. The CEO stared at the SEC documents on the table, his hands trembling violently. You knew about this, he said to me, his voice a mixture of profound anger and desperate relief. You stopped the wire transfer. You saved the operating budget. Do not pretend I did this for your benefit, I told the CEO sharply, refusing to let him claim any high ground. You enabled a toxic, completely unchecked corporate environment. You allowed a corrupt vice president to exile the most talented developers in your company to a freezing basement so he could systematically replace them with a fraudulent con artist. You completely lost control of your own agency. The CEO flushed a deep, embarrassed red but remained completely silent. He knew he had absolutely no leverage. I turned my attention entirely back to the Zenith executives. They were no longer trying to leave the room. They were listening very carefully. They were ruthless, pragmatic corporate operators, and they easily recognized a hostile takeover when they saw one. Zenith still has a massive supply chain latency problem, I addressed the lead engineer, speaking strictly peer-to-peer. You still urgently need a predictive data model to optimize your consumer mapping before the fourth quarter retail surge. And the only people in this entire city who actually know how to build that specific architecture are standing right in front of you. And where is the actual data model? Now the lead engineer asked, her tone entirely professional, stripping away all of her previous disgust. "It is perfectly secure," I replied smoothly. We wiped the agency mainframe completely clean before we came upstairs. The only existing copy of the Zenith algorithm is heavily encrypted on a private offline server that belongs exclusively to my new company. I pulled the Crisis Management LLC operating agreements from my briefcase and placed them directly next to the SEC whistleblower report. As of this morning, Kira Leo and I operate as an elite independent digital consultancy firm. I announced, laying the strategic trap completely bare. We own the custom code. We own the back-end architecture. And we are fully prepared to restore this entire presentation and launch your digital infrastructure today. The boardroom went dead silent again. I had successfully cornered the CEO in his own building, completely dismantled Harrison in front of his billionaire clients, and officially placed a $15 million ransom on the stolen data. The CEO stared at the new LLC contracts I had laid on the mahogany table. The reality of his absolute defeat was finally settling into his features. He looked from the SEC whistleblower report to my face, his jaw working as he tried to salvage a shred of his corporate authority. "You cannot just steal a massive client from this agency," he stammered, his voice lacking any real conviction. "You signed an aggressive non-compete clause when you were hired as a director." I smiled, reaching back into my leather briefcase. A non-compete clause is instantly voided when the employer engages in documented criminal activity that materially breaches the core employment contract. My legal counsel was exceptionally thorough. I highly recommend you consult your own lawyers before the federal investigators arrive this afternoon. I pulled out 3 crisp, heavily watermarked envelopes and dropped them onto the table directly in front of him. They landed with a definitive heavy thud. "Those are our formal letters of immediate resignation," I stated. "We are severing all professional ties with this agency effective right this exact second. You no longer have a digital marketing department. You no longer have a lead architect. And you certainly no longer have a functional server." I walked past the CEO, completely ignoring Harrison, who was still slumped against the frosted glass wall in a state of catatonic shock. I stepped up to the front podium. Chase scrambled rapidly out of my way, pressing himself flat against the whiteboard as if I were holding a loaded weapon. I reached down and yanked the silver flash drive out of the localized laptop. The massive projection of the fraudulent property deed flickered and vanished, leaving the giant screen completely black. The room collectively exhaled, but I was not finished. The checkmate was not yet complete. I reached into my tailored suit jacket and produced a sleek matte black USB drive. This drive contained the genuine, fully encrypted Zenith predictive architecture. I plugged it into the laptop. I did not need to bypass any security prompts because I had built the clean code perfectly to Zenith specifications. The massive projector screen instantly illuminated with a breathtaking hyper-responsive data visualization interface. It tracked real-time consumer metrics with flawless precision, mapping supply chain solutions across a stunning rotating thermal globe. The Zenith executives actually gasped. It was a masterpiece of digital engineering. It was exactly what they had asked for, engineered to absolute perfection. But hovering over the center of the beautiful interface was a massive, unbreakable digital padlock icon, boldly stamped with the sleek logo of our new independent consultancy firm. "This is the ultimate solution to your supply chain latency," I announced to the Zenith lead engineer, projecting my voice across the expansive boardroom. "It is fully operational, heavily secured, and ready for immediate deployment. But the encryption key costs $15 million, and the contract gets signed directly with my LLC." The CEO slammed his fist violently against the mahogany table. "You are holding my entire agency hostage." "No," I replied, locking eyes with him, my voice completely devoid of empathy. "I am letting your corrupt agency die. The only question now is whether Zenith wants to sink with your burning ship or step onto our lifeboat." The Zenith lead engineer did not hesitate. She picked up my LLC operating agreement from the table, pulled a silver pen from her pocket, and clicked it open. "We are stepping onto the lifeboat," she said firmly. She pressed the silver pen against the crisp paper, and signed her name with a sharp, decisive stroke. In less than 5 seconds, a $15 million corporate account officially transferred from a massive corrupt agency directly into the hands of a woman they had exiled to a freezing basement. The CEO realized his absolute leverage was gone. Survival instincts kicked in. He turned his furious gaze toward his ruined vice president. "Harrison, you are terminated effective immediately," he barked, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Security is waiting in the lobby. You will not return to your office. You will not touch another computer. And Charles, if that is even your real name, you are fired as well. I am calling the Chicago police the second you step out of this building." Harrison did not argue. He looked completely shattered, a hollow shell of the arrogant executive who had tormented my team for years. He slowly pushed himself off the frosted glass wall and walked toward the boardroom doors, his expensive Italian suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Chase followed closely behind him, keeping his head down, desperately trying to avoid eye contact with the executives he had just tried to defraud. They walked out of the luxury suite, their fraudulent empire completely dismantled. I turned back to the Zenith delegation. The lead engineer handed me the signed contract. I took it, feeling the immense weight of the victory, but knowing this was only the beginning. The digital landscape across the country was shifting rapidly, and corporate security was a constantly evolving battlefield. We had won this war, but there were countless other agencies cutting corners, exploiting their top female talent, and leaving their networks completely vulnerable. The conflict was far from over, and our new firm was perfectly positioned to exploit every single weakness. "Let us unlock the system," I said smoothly. I typed the master decryption key into the localized laptop. The massive digital padlock on the projector screen vanished. The beautiful high-resolution consumer mapping interface sprang to life, actively pulling live retail data from across the nation. The Zenith executives immediately gathered around the screen, completely mesmerized by the flawless architecture my team had built. I stepped back, leaving the technical demonstration to Leo and Kira. They were no longer disposable assets. They were founding partners of an elite independent consultancy, commanding the executive boardroom with absolute authority. I walked over to the expansive glass windows and looked down at the rainy Chicago streets far below. I watched two small figures emerge from the building lobby, escorted by heavy security guards. Harrison and Chase stood on the wet pavement, completely exposed to the freezing downpour, with absolutely nowhere to go. I smiled, feeling a cold, satisfying surge of pure power. I had not just survived the toxic corporate ladder. I had burned it to the absolute ground and built an impenetrable fortress on the ashes. The crisis management firm was officially open for business, and we were coming for everything they told us we could not have.